When I was younger, I spent a lot of time in libraries. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Libraries were the place where I found routine and belonging. Books were my time and my space to manage. I was the kid that checked out a book on Monday and returned it on a Tuesday. Kind of like Matilda. In fact, the librarian was one of my best friends, just like Miss Honey was Matilda's. I vividly remember walking down the rows of shelves, my fingers brushing against book spines, searching for a story that felt like an adventure that I could step into. In a book, I could be anyone or anything, especially because I lived in a small town. I loved it, but I always wanted more. I wanted what every other 10-year-old wanted. I wanted magic. I wanted danger. I wanted discovery. But as I pulled book after book from the shelf, a pattern became impossible to ignore. Boys were saving kingdoms. Boys were discovering hidden worlds. Boys were solving mysteries. And the girls? They were sidekicks. They were love interests. And there I was thinking, why would I want to be a love interest at the age of 10? They were waiting to be saved. But I wasn't. I wasn't searching for a book. I was searching for a version of myself that I could relate to that didn't seem to exist. And it got me wondering, who gets to be the hero and who gets left on the sidelines? What I've learned is this. We tend to think of literacy as a basic skill, neutral, objective. But literacy is more than just the ability to read. It determines whose stories we tell, what we value, and whose possibilities we limit. Research makes this clear. A long-term analysis conducted by researchers at Emory University in 2021 found that while recent children's books show a slight improvement in gender balance overall, a deeper look reveals something more troubling. Across decades of publishing, books written by male authors feature male main characters, also known as protagonists, at a rate of 3 to 1. Let's take a moment to think about what that means. Look to your left. Now look to your right. That means only one person out of the 3 of you would be a woman. That imbalance compounds over time. Another study done at the University of South Australia in 2025 analyzed how children's books portray emotional responses. Boys were more likely to experience physical pain in stories, while girls were overwhelmingly more likely to cry in response to the same negative stimuli. Strength was modeled one way, vulnerability another, and it was based on gender. Strength was reserved for boys, and vulnerability was reserved for girls. These patterns, while subtle, exist, and they continue to be powerful. Because the stories we read early on don't just entertain us, they become the script we use to imagine our own potential. I know this not just from research, but from experience. As a voracious reader, I love books deeply. I would always read them and I would always think, wow, I want to be just like that. But I never saw a girl taking action or taking initiative, and so I thought I had to sit on the sidelines. I had to wait for somebody else to take charge of my story. When I started spending time reading books with younger children, I started noticing the same patterns repeating again and again. Girls gravitated towards stories where boys made the decision. In pretend play, girls defaulted to being princesses, rarely the explorer, rarely the leader. Even when given the choice, many girls hesitated to place themselves at the center of the story. And that's when I realized children don't just absorb stories, they absorb hierarchies. And over time, these hierarchies begin feeling normal, and they set the stage for how we do adult life. This isn't accidental. There is a hidden curriculum embedded in what we teach children to read. Perspective cannot change if it is constantly reinforced. You never get the opportunity to challenge your thinking if you see the same thing over and over again. Let's take a look at secondary education, for example. Advanced English and literature curricula overwhelmingly center male authors and male protagonists, framing their perspectives as universal. Female stories are often treated as special topics rather than foundational texts. Even early textbooks quietly reinforce norms. We all know what it looks like. Mom cooks dinner, dad goes to work, sister helps with the household while the son plays tag. The message isn't loud, but it's consistent, and representation matters more than we think. Which brings me to my final point. When people are exposed to only one narrative over and over again, living out a different reality in the way we speak, in the way we live, in the way we treat others becomes overwhelmingly difficult. But Harvard research shows that exposure to female protagonists and exposure to female leaders can actively help counter gender stereotypes in professional settings. When students learn about women's accomplishments and women's feats, female students are far more likely to share their own ideas and expertise, raising the quality of discussion for everyone, regardless of gender. So, if representation isn't about checking a box, then what might it be? It's an opportunity to expand what somebody believes is possible for themselves. And the best part is, this is a system that we can change. We don't have to wait for publishing trends to catch up. We don't have to wait for curriculum reform. We can start by being intentional. We can actively curate reading materials that reflect a wider range of voices and experiences. So the question isn't who gets to be the hero, it's who has the power to make decisions. And here's the answer. All of us do. We can invite children to rewrite stories, to imagine different endings, to place themselves at the center of narratives. Because literacy is not passive, it's participatory. So, I want to return to that library, this time as somebody creating change, as somebody taking charge of her own story so that other students don't face the same things I did. Because when a child walks into a library and looks for a hero that looks like them, speaks like them, and dreams like them, they deserve to find one. And when we start inviting children to see themselves not just in the story, but as the storyteller, everything changes. Thank you.